Hola a todos y bienvenidos a Monday Night Travel. My name is Gabe Gunning, and I have the privilege of serving as your host this evening as we stay on this side of the Atlantic to explore colorful and historic Mexico City with a very special guest. Now, without further ado, it is time to get to tonight's destination, but to do that, we need our very special guest. So I would like to welcome on the author of several Mexico guidebooks, guidebook author Julie Meade. Julie, welcome to Monday Night Travel.
Thank you, Gabe. I'm so happy to be here.
We're happy to have you here. Where exactly are you joining us from tonight?
Well, I'm actually in the Mexican state of Veracruz, which is on
Ooh.
the Gulf Coast, but it's not too far from Mexico City. It's sort of a different world, but it's not too far from the city where I spend lots of time as well.
And Julie, I guess I'm curious, how is it that you ended up in Mexico and came to have written at least two guidebooks there, to my knowledge, maybe more? Um, yeah, what path brought you there?
Well, I think my path began like many people's to Mexico, which was I came on vacation. Um, I think I was about 21 or 22 years old, and I realized I had never been to Mexico. So I planned a trip to Mexico City and Oaxaca with one of my close friends, and I just fell in love with it. So the next year, I quit my job and just moved down to Mexico. Ended up moving to Mexico City where I taught English and sort of cobbled together different work. But a funny thing is, I had a copy of the first edition of the guidebook that I write today, which is Moon, Mexico City. So that guidebook back then, this was probably 2000 or 2001. There wasn't a lot of tourism to Mexico City. There wasn't a big expat community. So the guidebook was such a companion to me. I used it to find the best karaoke bars and the best cantinas and to really understand a lot about Mexico City culture, which at that time I was just getting to know. So it was really a dream come true. I took over on the fifth edition, and the ninth edition of the book is coming out this summer. But truly, I was lucky to have a dream come true when I got to start writing Moon, Mexico City about 10 years
Well,
ago.
I have not been to Mexico City yet myself, but it is one of my top destinations. So, as one of your future guidebook readers, I already thank you for all of the tips. And so tonight, the Monday Night Travel team did think, hey, we have a show on Cinco de Mayo. We've been wanting to do something on Mexico. This could be a great fit. Now, many Americans erroneously think that Cinco de Mayo is Mexican Independence Day. It is not, and we will talk about Independence Day later in tonight's show. But can you briefly tell us what is Cinco de Mayo and is it actually as celebrated in Mexico as it is in the US?
No, it most certainly is not as celebrated here, except for in the city of Puebla, which is it's celebrating a battle that took place in the city of Puebla, defeating the French, which might come as a surprise to some people. It was actually the second French invasion of Mexico. And there was a very definitive battle where the Mexican army won. It took place in Puebla. So they are having a big party in Puebla tonight, but most of the country, it's a quiet evening, not a big holiday. It's become very popular in the United States and as, a symbol of Mexican heritage, which is awesome, but totally different than the way it's celebrated here.
Well, though Cinco de Mayo may not be super directly related to Mexico City itself, we are glad to have you here tonight and to be celebrating a part of Mexico on this Cinco de Mayo. And I think let's get started.
Great.
I used to be, I think a lot of our viewers know, I used to be a high school Spanish teacher and taught a lot about Mexico history. So this is top of my list, and I'm eager to learn from you tonight.
Well, I'm really excited to share because Mexico City is really having a moment. I mean, there's never been a better time to visit. It's just culturally, culinarily, in every way, just exploding. We'll only get to touch on a little bit of it, but I'm so excited to get to share a little bit about what I love about Mexico City. So I guess let's just start with the basics, which is that Mexico City, as many of you probably know, is one of the biggest cities in the world. By most counts, it's the biggest city in the Western Hemisphere. Certainly in North America, Sao Paulo gives it a run for its money, but there's something like 24 million people estimated to live in the whole metropolitan region. And In addition to being a big city, it's also a very high city. It's actually located at over 2,200 meters or over 7,000 feet. So you're way up in the mountains here.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's higher than Denver.
Yeah, I know, which is a surprise to a lot of people. It's hard to remember that you're in the mountains because it doesn't have that like alpine feeling because we're also in the tropics.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, it is high.
So should travelers, is that high enough that people should anticipate the possibility of a little bit of altitude sickness?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think with the combination of the fact that it's high, the air is very dry there, and unfortunately, there's a lot of air pollution. So the combination can definitely lead to some mild symptoms for some people, headaches or some nausea. Um, Not uncommon to experience that. Good to take it easy on the first day in Mexico City.
And probably drink a lot of water.
Definitely,
Good.
definitely staying hydrated is key.
Speaking of water,
Speaking of water, so to understand Mexico City, you have to start way back at its founding to understand Mexico City today. So this is a map of Mexico City when the Spanish arrived, Hernan Cortez and the Spanish arrived in 1519, but it's pretty similar in terms of topography to how it looked in the 14th century when a tribe of nomadic people, we call them the Aztecs, but they referred to themselves as the Mexica. And the Mexica is where Mexico gets its name from the Mexica people. So the Mexica were a nomadic tribe that traveled, they were traveling throughout central Mexico from the north, trying to find a place to settle down. And they come across this beautiful valley covered in lakes, surrounded by mountains, lots of game animals, there's fresh water springs. So it's a wonderful place to live. Unfortunately for them, it was not a warm welcome because there were already lots of other tribes and settlements here in the Valley of Mexico. So their story was quite an odyssey of being chased out and enslaved, circling the lake, trying to find a place until finally, and you can see it on this map, there is a little star. They found an uninhabited island in the middle of the lake. And when they arrived at this uninhabited island, they saw a prophesied vision, which was an eagle, a golden eagle, with a serpent in its talons on top of a nopal, prickly pear cactus. So you might recognize that description. That's the symbol on the Mexican flag. And that was the prophesied vision that they had found their homeland. So they knew that they were in the right place. And they may have been right about that because in a few centuries' time, through some pretty aggressive warfare and excellent city planning, they grew their little island city into the capital of a giant empire that ran all the way through Mesoamerica. So all of southern Mexico into Guatemala, a massive empire. And they built a beautiful city right on top of their lake. Excuse me, on top of their island in the lake. But the city was right in the middle of the lake. So this is, there's so many interesting things. I really encourage anyone to read about the city. This is named Tenochtitlan, Mexico, Tenochtitlan. And it's really fascinating to read everything about Tenochtitlan, but I do just want to point out very quickly a couple of features because they will come up in our discussion of Mexico City today. One is that there was a ceremonial center at the very center of the city with twin temple pyramids and all of the sort of religious buildings and palaces of the most important people right there in the center. And then around the outside of that area was where people lived, the residents of Tenochtitlan. And they devised a very ingenious system of farming in using hydroponic man-made farms that floated on top of the lake bed all around Tenochtitlan. So the people actually traveled around the city on canoe because they sort of built this artificial city on top of the lake. Now, we don't know totally what that looked like, but this is a rendering of what the city might have been like when the Spanish arrived. And they, of course, were dazzled by it. It was beautiful, orderly, clean, Super populous, potentially by some estimates, more populous than any city in Europe at the time.
Hmm. And so does that mean that modern Mexico City is built on top of a lake?
Yeah, it is, in fact. Um, yeah, this is still the very center of town, which we'll get to in just a minute. But the rest of the city, the lake was slowly drained over centuries, and the rest of the city was built on top of the lake beds. They were very shallow lakes, but they eventually were drained out to make room for the city as it grew. There's still some lake left, though, of Lake Texcoco. You can still see little parts of it past the airport. And this is just an artist rendering of the ceremonial center of Tenochtitlan.
Well, thank you for that historical tour. I love learning that history. I taught some of it to one of my classes, and a couple of my students actually gave me a pair of socks with nopal cactuses on them, because I always talked about the story of the nopal cactus. So I loved reliving that, and I'm eager now to you're going to take us neighborhood by neighborhood through modern
Yeah.
Mexico City.
Yeah, we're gonna sort of head south through the city. We're gonna start right there in the Centro Histórico, which is what we were just looking at. It's the island today, transformed, of course, into a modern city. Um, so this is the place where you should begin your tour of Mexico City. Is right here in the Zocalo, which is a big open square right in the center of the city. There we have, again, the Mexican flag with the nopal and the eagle. And the Zocalo was an open square in Tenochtitlan too. So when the Spanish came, we didn't actually get to the conquest. When the Spanish arrived, and there was the huge clash between Hernan Cortes and Emperor Moctezuma, and eventually Tenochtitlan was vanquished by the Spanish forces after a very long battle. They actually left a lot of things the same, and one of them was that they left the Zocalo, just a big open square, just like it was during the pre-Columbian era. And in a really nice innovation, it's still an open square and really nice innovation. They just recently closed it to automobile traffic. So it's a lovely place to stroll. In the evenings, it's all lit up with lights. And there's always something going on there. So here's just a sort of slice of life moment during a gastronomy festival. It's always thronged with people. There might be a concert, there might be a movie screening, but it's a place filled with activity. And then on one end of the Zocalo is the Metropolitan Cathedral. So this is the cathedral. I always like to say that it really shows the central place that the Catholic Church played in Mexican society, well, in Spanish society as well, that right here on the central square, the dominant building is this big cathedral.
Hmm. And whenever I see cathedrals in Mexico, Julie, I always do, I always feel like they evoke more of a European style of cathedral than what I typically see in the US if I see a cathedral. So are there kind of very direct European roots of these Mexican cathedrals?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, this was New Spain. Mexico City was the capital of New Spain for 300 years. So it was highly influenced by all of the, styles in Europe. So, it moved through the same where we have the Baroque and the Churrigueresque, and all of those styles and trends came to Mexico City as well. And the only thing is that they were interpreted in a lot of cases by local artisans with their own aesthetics and traditions. So Mexico has a lot of European influence, just like you're saying, but there's also some really unique qualities and some really beautiful differences that you'll notice as you travel.
Hmm.
Um, this cathedral was built over several hundred years. It was originally built right after the conquest, but it was a little tiny church that everybody, they actually called Mexico City the city of palaces because it was so wealthy as the capital of New Spain. And they built all these beautiful palaces and they had this little dinky cathedral. So then they spent 200 years building this other cathedral. And one of the things about it is that there was always this suspicion that the pyramids of the Templo Mayor of Tenochtitlan, the Mexica city, many people thought that the pyramids were underneath the cathedral. So for years, there was lots of debate. No one knew exactly where it had been. No one had a map. So they were close, but it wasn't quite under the cathedral. It was right beside the cathedral was the ruins of the Templo Mayor, the twin temple pyramids that were at the center of Mexico City back when it was Tenochtitlan. So for me, this is one of the most fascinating places to visit in the city. It was covered with colonial era palaces and buildings for centuries. And many people had an idea that something was strange about this particular plot of land because it was a little bit raised. It was called the Hill of the Dogs because a lot of dogs hung out there and it was a little bit raised, but no one wanted to go, no one wanted to demolish these old palaces and buildings that lived there, that had been built there. So in the 1970s, after lots of speculation, people did have an idea that the Templo Mayor might be here. In the 1970s, electric company workers were tunneling behind the pyramid, the cathedral, and they tunneled into a giant monolith. And that was sort of the catalyst when finally archaeologists, the government, everyone said, okay, we know we have these beautiful buildings, people live in them, they're historic, but we're going to demolish all of these city blocks so that we can excavate because we think we have found the Templo Mayor. And of course, I'm sort of shortening this story because there have been lots of clues over the centuries. People would renovate their basement and they would find, a staircase or things like that. So there were some clues, but they finally found the Templo Mayor, and this is its base. And what you can see here is that the Templo Mayor was built over different eras. So sort of like a Russian doll, like it was a smaller pyramid, and then they built another pyramid on top of that, and on top of that. Now, a lot of it was raised in the conquest, and some of it's been reconstructed here, but you can still get a little bit of a sense of, first of all, its scale. It was very big, and you can also sort of get a sense of how it was built. They've built these walkways through the archaeological site. It's just fascinating, absolutely fascinating to be right in the middle of Mexico City and be at this archaeological site where one of the most historic events in history took place, where the meeting of the Europeans and the Americas, the conquest of Mexico that started, a whole new chapter in world history. So I just get, goosebumps going here. I love it.
Well, and thank you for sharing that, Julie. I'm always fascinated. I know there's many places in Europe where it feels like they can't do a single construction project without hitting some archaeological find. And then the construction has to be halted because there's laws governing it, and you have to do archaeological survey. And so I'm always fascinated by that tension between kind of developing modern cities and exploring the past.
Yeah. Yeah. And Mexico City's had to take a really interesting approach because, of course, they have all these beautiful buildings that we suspect there are even older buildings below it. One of the things they've done actually is created these archaeological windows, they call them. So what they'll do is dig up a whole floor in a really old palace, see what's under there, note it for the scholars, and then they'll actually put a window in the floor and put everything back, but with a window so you can see down into, oh, here this was the base of Montezuma's palace and so on. But the Templo Mayor was really one of the biggest of all. It was a big battle to decide what to do because they did have to demolish tons of, really historic buildings. This is an interesting photo too because it shows just how this is a more modern water pipe that ran right through the pyramids, and somehow they installed this, and I don't know if they didn't know the pyramids were there. So anyway, it's a beautiful site. It's so moving. I highly recommend you start your tour of Mexico City right here. Oh, and just a quick, this is a recreation of Quetzalcoatl. He was the serpent god, one of the top gods in the Mexica pantheon. So you
I
can
always
see
loved
that.
teaching my students the name of the Aztec gods. My favorite was the god of war, Huitzilopochtli. So fun to
Exactly.
say.
Yeah, he was one of the gods that actually that Twin Temple Pyramid he was one of the gods it was dedicated
Ah.
to.
And I know there's a lot of influence on that original language on modern day Latin American Spanish.
Yeah, that's true. So the language that was spoken by the Mexica people, Nahuatl, is actually still spoken today by millions of people here in Mexico, a more modern version, but it was spoken by millions of people then and now. And a lot of words actually come from Nahuatl that we use in English, believe it or not. So like aguacate is avocado, aguacatl was the original word. Or let me think of another one. Jitomate, tomato,
Oh,
tomatl.
tomatl.
Yeah, yeah. So if you look around, you'll actually find quite a number of words that they're in common use in Spanish. Oh, chocolate. Chocolate was chocolatl.
Huh.
So chocolate, the word that we use, actually comes from Nahuatl.
I never even knew that we had words in English that we use.
Yeah, yeah. It's amazing the influence of it. Now we're inside the museum that's right next to the Templo Mayor as part of the entrance to the archaeological site. There's a museum with a bunch of artifacts that were recovered from the site. Um, Definitely worth some time getting to see all of these beautiful pieces that were recovered right there. Um, this is a wall of stone skulls. We won't have too much time to talk about it, but there was a big cult of the dead in Mexica culture, which we still see in Day of the Dead today in Mexico. It's another, yet again, influence. These are just two other uh, pieces in the collection. And I actually wanted to show this one on the left here because this giant monolith, this was only found in 2006. So, this is all really very living. There's still finds constantly. We're still having the situation where someone renovates a basement and we find a Mexica school underneath a palace. And yeah, this beautiful piece was just added to the collection. And sort of as a segue to that, we can see a lot of ways that Spanish culture and the Mesoamerican, the pre-Columbian culture are mixed. This is a really fascinating street corner where a colonial era palace actually used a carved serpent head as their cornerstone. And it's been here for 500 years. So it's actually a little bit unnerving. This was actually a sign of dominance and humiliation that the Spanish were saying, oh, we've taken your stones and built on top of you. But this was quite literally what they did after the conquest. The Spanish built a lot of their churches and palaces with the stones from the fallen pyramids and palaces of the Mexica people. And just to continue on the point, this is actually located in a subway station, this beautiful Templo de Hecatl, who is a wind god. This one they found by accident when they were building the first line of the metro. It's in the metro Pino Suarez. And some consider it the most visited archaeological site in Mexico because every day tens of thousands of people pass this site. So you actually have to go in, you can pay your metro pass and go in and you can actually take a look at this temple. But the entire Centro Histórico, I guess the point I'm trying to make is that it is a blend and a mix of cultures, and we see this in people too. So, this is right outside the cathedral. There's still a lot of interest, pride, and beauty in the relationship to pre-Columbian Mexico. These are dancers. They call them concheros or Aztec dancers that, they're dancing out right outside the cathedral, but with a sort of indigenous feel to it.
And Julie, if my understanding is Nahuatl, the Aztec language didn't have really a written form. So how were these kind of traditions like dances kept alive? Were they kind of passed down through generations?
Yeah, I mean, I think to an extent. In the case of these dances, I think some of them too are also a recreation of what people imagine might have happened. There was also there was a decimation of the culture to a certain extent as well. So, I think it's a mix of some things stayed alive over the centuries. I'm not sure an anthropologist would have to answer exactly which ones, but yeah, some traditions, it's a mix of traditions that were passed down and then other things that have come to light and people have reincorporated into modern culture. So on the other end of the Zocalo, we are still in the Zocalo. On the other end of the Zocalo, we are, this is the Palacio Nacional. It's the seat of the executive branch of government. The president lives here and has her offices here.
And there's a new president, right?
Yeah, that's her right there, Claudia Sheinbaum. She
And
just,
how
go
has she
ahead.
been received, and what are kind of her goals for Mexico?
Well, she is a continuation of the previous president too. We have a very leftist party, Morena, which won the presidency with the previous president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Claudia Sheinbaum was the head of Mexico City government during his term. It's a 6-year term for president. She was very popular as president of Mexico City. She was elected in somewhat of a landslide last July. And interestingly, yeah, I think she was, elected with well over like 65 or 60% of the vote, but now she's got an over 80% approval rating. She's very popular, very well, I would say, for our audience, I would say it's she's got a very social-minded program. Lots of focus on providing services, bumping minimum wage, things like that. So it's been a very popular presidency so far.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And it's
And
one of about coming to visit Mexico City too, of course, is that, we're in a moment of change with the first female president.
And I know that there is another very important feature of the Palacio Nacional that I am going to intro for us. So I'm
Yeah.
going to dust off my teacher hat. It's been about a decade since I have taught this stuff, but I used to teach Mexican history to my ninth and 10th grade students in Michigan. And one really important feature of the Palacio Nacional is this bell that we see here. And there's an exciting story behind it that is related to actual Mexican independence, which is not on Cinco de Mayo. It is on el 16 de septiembre, the 16th of September. And it goes back to this man, Don Miguel Hidalgo. He was a parish priest in the small town of Dolores, not far from modern day San Miguel de Allende. And in 1808, so this is during the period of Spain still controlling Mexico, but Napoleon Bonaparte came down and he um, forced the abdication of the Spanish King Ferdinand and put his own brother in the post of king instead. Many people across the Atlantic in modern day Mexico were not happy about that. And so there were kind of all of these little secret societies that formed throughout Mexico, some that still supported the deposed King Ferdinand, some that wanted complete independence from Spain. But the main ruling elite decided that they were going to stay in line with this new king, the brother of Napoleon. One of the dissidents was Don Miguel Hidalgo, the parish priest, and he was part of one of those groups that wanted complete Mexican independence. Unfortunately, in the year 1810, some of the Spanish officials learned of this group, and Don Miguel Hidalgo was encouraged to flee. Instead, he went to his church and he rang the church bell in the parish in Dolores and drew all of his parishioners to him and gave a fiery speech against the ruling elite. And he started this entire little rebel group that went through various towns and cities claiming them. It was a group of indigenous and mestizo, meaning mixed race between the indigenous and Europeans, leading these people towards Mexico City in defiance of the Spanish. Unfortunately, they did not quite make it to Mexico City. Their revolution was quashed. Don Miguel Hidalgo was executed, but his actions lived on. He became the face of the struggle for independence over the next decade until it was finally won about a decade later. And to this day, his literal declaration of independence, his speech that he gave, is considered the Mexican Declaration of Independence. It is called El Grito de Dolores, the Cry of Dolores. And while his exact words are lost to time, now every year on Independence Day, the president will ring this bell that now sits at the Palacio Nacional and will cry out, Viva Mexico, Viva la Independencia, Vivan los héroes. Long live Mexico, long live independence, long live the heroes. And is this something that you've ever heard in person, Julie?
I have never gone in person, but I have watched it live streamed on YouTube before. You know,
Okay.
thousands of people crowd the Zocalo. That's not my scene.
Okay.
But it's definitely cool too because they also, but depending on the president's agenda or interest, they also might add in some things. You know, Claudia Scheinbaum, what she did when she does her first one, we'll look forward to. My goodness, now I'm blanking. On if that would have, no, she hadn't actually come into office, so she'll have it this year. But you know, they'll often say, you know, long live the pueblos indígenas, the, you know, the indigenous people of Mexico, or long live the poor, long live this, so that, you know, it becomes sort of a personalized shout for, you know, for freedom and for rights.
They'll
Yeah,
add in their own vivas.
yeah, exactly. Their own vivas.
Well, I think we're going to transition now from Don Miguel Hidalgo to another very famous Mexican.
Yeah, so this is the reason to visit the Palacio. Now, the Palacio Nacional was built right on top of Moctezuma's former palaces. So it is a very historic building that dates back to the very early colonial era. But the main reason that most people go to visit is to see this beautiful mural series by Diego Rivera, which chronicles the history of Mexico, starting with the Tenochtitlan, the city of Tenochtitlan, and then heads through the conquest. And it's a really immersive and beautiful piece of artwork. And Diego Rivera himself was a student of anthropology and, you know, amateur student of anthropology, very interested. What I find very moving here is that he spent a lot of time studying the culture of Tenochtitlan and getting a lot of the details right. So, you know, the tools that they're using, the city plan. This is actually his version of Tenochtitlan as seen from the city of Tlatelolco. We're going to talk about Tlatelolco in a minute. It's a sister city to Tenochtitlan, but I find this very moving, especially this is right across the street from the Templo Mayor. So I encourage you very much, if you go to the Templo Mayor, then go across the street. It's free to enter. You can go into the president. You can visit other things in the palace. You can visit the presidential, like there's a history museum with their, you know, their old offices and so on. But really the thing to see is these beautiful murals. Um,
And and Julie, do you feel like that Aztec history and the memory of European conquest, is that still something that's very top of mind for the Mexican people?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, yes and no. I think that it's just very living in what Mexico is today. You know, it has not been forgotten. Um, at the same time, it isn't necessarily rehashed every minute. It's just something that is, you know, this is a country that was built on this sort of brutal conquest and the clash of cultures, but it's very living in a really beautiful way. Now, the Palacio Nacional is often closed because it is the executive branch of government. So I wanted to give you another option. If you can't go to the Palacio Nacional because there's a political protest or an election that day or any of the many reasons that it might be closed, you're only a couple blocks away from another site of beautiful murals by Diego Rivera in the Museo Vivo del Muralismo. This is actually, until recently, this was actually a government building. This was the headquarters for the Secretary of Public Education. And it was way back in the 1920s when the Secretary of Public Education, Jose Vasconcelos, started the mural program that Mexico became so famous for. He actually paid young artists to decorate public buildings. It was all part of this post-revolutionary moment to celebrate Mexican culture and history. And he commissioned Diego Rivera to paint 3 stories of murals in this beautiful old palace that then was used until recently as the headquarters for the Secretary of Public Education. So it's a monumental piece of artwork. They just reopened it. So after years of being, you could visit it. It was open to the public, but it was a whole rigmarole to get in because it was private offices. But now they have actually moved the government building, most of the government offices mostly out of here, and it is a free museum, and it's just a beautiful space. Every open space has been painted. There's also some murals by other artists too. It's not only Diego Rivera's work. Again, very moving, very beautiful. Highly recommend a visit. Now we're going to start moving outside of the area right around the Zocalo. We've spent so much time and we've barely got anywhere yet on foot, but there's a lot to see. This is the street Madero. This is one of the oldest streets in the city. It runs right off the Zocalo, and as you can see, it's a pedestrian street. So I definitely recommend you do a little walking tour down Madero. It's a truly lovely stroll. That's another view of it. You've got palaces, hotels. And then it's also just got a lot of clamor, a lot, there's convenience stores, nothing precious about it. I mean, there's some really beautiful things, but at the same time, it's very alive, very modern too. I love the mix of cultures. This is just give you an idea of some of the architecture along Madero. That's a very old, on the left there, a very old early colonial church. And right next to it is this clock tower that's I think, from the 19th century, neoclassical. So it's this real hodgepodge mix of architecture. These are just two lovely examples of some earlier Baroque architecture. This is obviously European inspired. So you got to really keep your eyes peeled as you go. But like I said, they're right next to one of these will be a Starbucks. And that was just to show there's a really vibrant street life. You never know what you're going to find in the Centro. There's always lots of people. There might be a rock band and a bunch of people dancing. It's really just a lovely and vibrant place to visit. This is one of the most famous buildings in the Centro. It's a 17th century palace. See these beautiful hand-painted tiles. And I wanted to note it specifically because inside is a Sanborn's restaurant. Sanborn's is an institution in Mexico City. If you spend any amount of time there, you will end up in a Sanborn's. I hesitate to call it a diner. That gives it the wrong feel, but it's a chain restaurant. It's owned by Carlos Slim, who's one of the most famous, one of the richest men in the world. And so you can go into Sanborn's and have a meal inside this beautiful 17th century palace. And it's fun, it's inexpensive, and it's absolutely gorgeous. I love going here for breakfast. You get some eggs with salsa and enjoy this just absolutely beautiful space. That's just another view of it. And since we're on the topic, I did want to point out, there's so many wonderful places to eat, but when you are in the Centro Histórico, I would recommend going with one of the old school spots, or at least a traditional Mexican restaurant. This is a more traditional part of town in a lot of ways. We're going to get to the more trendy dining scene. So Mexico City's got a very famous dining scene now, but in the Centro, I really like a lot of the classics. This is another one. This is the Casino Español. This is actually Spanish food. Again, really big, really beautiful. It's just a fun experience.
And Julie, is there any kind of restaurant etiquette that people should be aware of when they are in Mexico? I know often in Spain or in Europe in general, sometimes there's confusion from Americans because they don't know that they need to wave down their waiter for the check, or they don't know how much they're supposed to tip. What would be some basic restaurant tips that you would give?
Yeah. Well, they are pretty basic. The service in Mexico City is excellent. It's famously excellent. I think there's very few places, the casino is a great example. But I think, yeah, one thing is definitely that same tip is that no one is ever going to bring you your check in Mexico. So they may be very attentive. And even if you have been there for an hour, they're not going to drop a check off at your table. They'll ask if you want some more water, if you want to order anything else. They're right at your, they're standing at attention, but they're not going to bring that check until you ask for it. So that's a good thing to know. And then tipping, I would generally say 15% is standard in Mexico City. But a lot of times when I'm visiting, when I'm not living there full time, I'll tip 20% as well. I think it's appreciated. I'm a tipper, but I definitely recommend going on the higher end of the spectrum. But I mean, it is a scale for sure, but I'd say 15 is about average. And here I just wanted to show you not only this beautiful food and this beautiful restaurant. It's a lovely place to go. And actually, this is right across the street. Now, I know I just said you should go to the old school places, but this is actually a sort of new school restaurant, Azul Histórico. It's right across the street. It's also in a palace, in the courtyard of a palace. And it's a newer restaurant, but it's also delicious. They serve a lot of regional food from the southern parts of Mexico. So you can try Yucatec food or Oaxacan food here. They have a lot of dishes that are inspired. Really good spot. And no tour of the Centro would be complete without mentioning Bar La Opera. So Bar La Opera this is like a must stop. It's one of the oldest cantinas in Mexico City. It's a little more like a restaurant now than a traditional cantina, but it's still a cantina. And there are supposedly bullet holes that Pancho Villa shot into the ceiling. The Mexican revolutionary Pancho Villa shot into the ceiling of the cantina. That if you ask the staff, they'll show you where the bullet holes are. Not everyone believes that. Pancho Villa actually was a teetotaler. So, maybe he wasn't in there drinking. I think we know he was there, though, so it's possible. But it's just a really beautiful place and a great place to go for a shot of tequila or for a meal, for like a nice traditional Mexican meal. And the atmosphere is lovely.
And Julie, what's the difference between a bar and a cantina?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, a cantina, so a bar is a place to drink. A cantina is, by contrast, a place to eat and drink. And I'd say that there's a range in what a cantina will do. So a cantina can be a place where people primarily drink. There'll always be some sort of snack. It can be a place that's more like a restaurant, like in this case, but it's traditionally a cantina. And then a lot of cantinas are actually kind of both. They're neighborhood spots where people come in. And a very traditional thing in Mexico City is for the cantina, as you order a drink, with each drink, you get a little plate of food for free. So it's a great place to go for lunch. You have a couple of beers and you get food served as you go. So some of the cantinas that have this setup are actually more famous for their food than anything else. Like there's some that are just absolutely delicious, wonderful places to eat. Actually have another slide of a cantina here to give you an idea. This is like a more just your traditional neighborhood cantina. Oh, there we go. Oh, I thought this was a video. I don't know. It doesn't want to play. Okay. Oh, wait. I can't play it. There we go. So that should just give you an idea. This is Salon Paris in the Santa Maria la Ribera. It's pretty close to the Centro. But this is what they feel like. Very casual places. Children are allowed in lots of cantinas. It's hard to define the difference between a bar and a cantina, but a cantina is generally a little more laid back, more for eating, drinking, hanging out. And again, yeah, you might even have kids in some of them. It sort of depends on the place. All right, so now we're finally moving a little further west of the Centro. We're going to cross Madero from the other side. This is a really busy intersection here in Mexico City. These people are actually heading onto the pedestrian street Madero that we walked the other direction. They're walking this way, but we're going to see right here at the foot of Madero and the Eje Central is the Torre Latinoamericana. This was the largest or tallest skyscraper when it was built in the 1950s, and the tallest in Mexico City. And to this day, there are no other skyscrapers around it. And the result is that there is a beautiful view from the observation deck up at the top. This was some video I took from the observation deck. Just really get panoramic views of the city because there's nothing else there. There are skyscrapers, but in other parts of the city, so they're so far away that nothing is blocking your view. And on clear days, you can even see the volcanoes that are in the distance there. I highly recommend going up there. There's rarely crowds unless it's a holiday or, a Sunday, a weekend. But, between the week, just buy your ticket, go up. You have to take a couple of vertigo-inducing elevators up to the tippity top. But rest assured, this skyscraper has made it through many earthquakes. It has a very good deep foundation. And though I've heard it sways a lot during an earthquake, it's one of the safer places to be. And then just to point out a few more, I was mentioning that architecture is a reason to visit Mexico City. And it's something that the government has invested in since the beginning. This is two 19th century pieces. One is the Museo de Arte Nacional. The National Art Museum has a lovely collection that starts in the colonial era of Mexican pieces. The other is the Palacio Postal. It's actually a post office. And this doesn't even do it justice. It's a beautiful post office built in the, whoa, oh my gosh. Okay, hang on. Sorry, I apologize, everyone. There is a really big bug. Oh, that just flew right. Okay. These are the hazards of living in the cloud forest in Veracruz. My apologies. The Palacio Postal. So it's still a working post office. I mean, unfortunately, people don't use the post as much as they used to, but so the crown jewel, though, of 19th century architecture is the Palacio de Bellas Artes. So this was started in the 19th century. It was interrupted during the Mexican Revolution of 1910. So the building had been started. It's made of marble. It's beautiful. It's you can see all of the neoclassical details. But interestingly, then it was halted for many decades during the war. So by the time the construction started up again, all of the styles and trends had changed. So the inside is actually Art Deco. And it is an incredibly beautiful Art Deco space, these big domes. And it also is home to many, many interesting murals. This one is by Siqueiros, who's one of the most famous muralists. We don't have time to talk about all of them, but yeah, there's Rivera, there's Tamayo, lots of big names. And if you pay your ticket to go see, there's the museum is upstairs, pay your ticket to go see these murals. There's also a lovely contemporary art museum that often does a lot of really interesting shows with contemporary work by Mexican artists and international artists. So this is definitely a place to check out, put on your list. And the Palacio sits right on the edge of the Alameda Central, which is the oldest park in Mexico City. It was an aristocratic strolling park in the early days and eventually became a very popular place. Again, another hub of activity, always lots of people walking around, kids jumping in the fountains. And while we're here, I just want to take a little detour. We don't have a lot of time to talk about it, but Mexico is a really wonderful place to shop for. We have really wonderful handcraft traditions. So one of the biggest handcraft markets in the city is La Ciudadela, which is not too far from the Alameda. It's hard to even capture. It's like a labyrinth of colors and techniques. Mexico's famous for all sorts of things. You'll find a lot of them here in La Ciudadela: ceramics, textiles, glass blowing. More and more too, there are imports from China that look like Mexican handcrafts. It's pretty easy to tell the difference because of the price. So if something seems impossibly cheap, it may not actually be from Mexico, but it's definitely a place I also recommend doing some shopping. There's no way you won't find something beautiful there.
And Julie, when people shop here, is this a culture where kind of in these markets, you're expected to kind of haggle for a price, or is the price just what's posted?
Yeah, that's a really good question. In general, um, I would say haggling, I would keep it to a minimum. It is often if you're buying in bulk, you're buying a couple pieces, the price might come down a little bit. But I would say just go with it if it feels good to you. In most cases, these are handmade pieces by artisan communities that all of us want to support and see continue living from their work. So my suggestion generally is if the price seems good to you, I just pay it. I don't, and then sometimes the seller, if you're on the fence, will offer a lower price, but I'm not talking about a big significant discount. There might be a small discount off the top to get you motivated to take it, but no, it's not a big haggling culture. And I think that is a little bit of a misconception because in a lot of cultures where they have markets like this, there is more haggling, but it can be a little bit offensive too. So I'd say keep that to a minimum. I mean, you can say, is that the best price? Something tactful like that, I think is very acceptable, but I wouldn't go much further.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then not far from there, this is the other place I wanted to show you, not too far from La Ciudadela, is Café La Habana. This was once a Cuban neighborhood in Mexico City, and this cafe dates way back, 100 years at least, I think, and they say that Fidel Castro and Che Guevara planned the Cuban Revolution right here in Café La Habana. It's a wonderful place to come for breakfast and a great atmosphere, as you can see. And the thing to get here is a café con leche, which is a very strong coffee, almost espresso strength, that's served with hot milk right at your table. It's delicious here. And I did just want to note that Mexico is a coffee growing country. So coffee is everywhere. In the Centro Histórico, you'll smell the old roasters. There's a lot of old roasteries that have been in business for a century. And they roast some great beans from Mexico, from where I am, right here in Veracruz, Oaxaca, Hidalgo, Chiapas, are all coffee growing regions. And you also get your fancy method coffee. You can get, this is from a place in the Roma Cardinal, which I love for getting coffee. They have all different, styles of brewing and single origin beans. So the coffee scene in Mexico is really thriving right now. For a long time, it was just these old roasters in the Centro Histórico that were doing the majority of the business, but now there's coffee. There's a lot of people that are hanging their hats in the coffee business, and it's a really fun place to come if you're a coffee drinker, try all the different beans and preparations. All right, so we're finally making our first foray out of the Centro Histórico, although not too far. We're just heading a little bit north, and I wanted to talk about Tlatelolco. Tlatelolco was a sister city to Tenochtitlan. So it was on sort of a smaller island right next to Tenochtitlan. And it's just a little bit north of where we were. But it really merits its own day. I wouldn't try to cram this into a day when you go to the Centro Histórico because there's enough to see here. And one thing I like, it's a little more off the beaten path. So I think this is a great place to go if you want a little more of a quiet, reflective experience with the ruins. So this was Tlatelolco, just to give a very quick history, was the site of the very last stand of the Mexica people. So after the siege on Tenochtitlan, which lasted months, the end of the conquest ended with a siege that the city was blocked off with food and water for several months. And finally, this sort of very bedraggled and exhausted Mexica people led by Cuauhtemoc Emperor Moctezuma had long since died. They fled to Tlatelolco, which was their sister city, also Nahuatl speaking, and this was where they were finally defeated by the Spanish. So it's a very powerful space. Today, this area that it's located in is called the Plaza de Tres Culturas, which is the Plaza of Three Cultures, referring to the pre-Columbian ruins, this very old 16th century church that are right next to the ruins, and the modern apartment buildings that actually in the modern offices that were built right next to the plaza. So it does actually create a rather striking juxtaposition. As you can see these apartment buildings in the back. But yeah, the ruin site is really lovely and very different feeling than Tenochtitlan, than the Templo Mayor. So I know, Gabe, you have a little bit to say about a very important person in Mexican history.
I do. I mean, you talking about kind of that final fall of the Aztecs and that last stand reminds me of my favorite figure from Mexican history, one that I could probably give a full 60-minute lecture on, but I'm just going to take about 60 seconds here to mention this woman, La Malinche, is what she's most commonly known as now. She was born in the Aztec Empire to a chieftain. Her name was Malinali. But her father passed away, her mother got remarried, and she was sold into slavery to the Maya civilization. Fast forward a bit, Hernan Cortez comes over. He wins a big battle in the city of Tabasco, and part of the prizes that he wins are these 20 female slaves, one of whom is Malinali. But Malinali is extremely smart. She picks up Spanish very quickly. She already knows the Mayan language and the Aztec language, Nahuatl. And so she becomes the the translator and lover of Hernan Cortez. She is always pictured in any Aztec art as right at his side, and helps translate for him, and eventually gives birth to one of his sons, who is not actually, but is symbolically considered the first mestizo, the first mixed race person between indigenous and European blood, which is now about 93% of modern day Mexico. And she's become this controversial figure and one that shifted throughout time because many people see her as a traitor to her people, as somebody who helped the Europeans with their conquest. And she's reviled by many. But I think as time goes on, some see her as maybe a victim who didn't have a lot of opportunity to choose. And some also just see her as a survivor that was sold into slavery and just found her way in the world any way she had to. And so there's a lot of interesting literature. I've actually asked Emily to post a link in the chat to a poem by a Chicana poet based out of Texas who wrote a really beautiful poem that kind of gets to the heart of that difficult relationship that the Mexican people have with this historical figure that is kind of symbolically started the modern Mexican race in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
Um, what
Yeah.
are your thoughts on her, Julie?
Well, I think the only caveat I would add is that, the Mexica people, though they do give their name to Mexico and we celebrate a lot of their culture, they were reviled by their subjects. They were very violent. Um, they were very demanding rulers. So, though their own city was orderly and clean, I think for a lot of people, betraying the Aztec people was not a crime. I think for a lot of people, just like Malinali, it would have been, they were no heroes either. So I think that there's definitely a very nuanced history around all of that. I agree with you. Read more if you're interested.
Yeah.
It's a really fascinating story, and she's a fascinating character. So it's just a detail, some beautiful details there in Tlatelolco, and another chance to take a peek at those big apartment buildings. Oops, excuse me. And then there's also a community center, a cultural center run by the university la Universidad Autónoma Nacional Autónoma de Mexico. It's the biggest university, very influential. This is a great place to see, to learn some more about the history. There's some really interesting history that took place here in Tlatelolco. But now we're going to start speeding down the rest of the city. So now we're going to head down the Paseo de la Reforma. So this is a big boulevard that was designed back in the 19th century to look like the Champs-Élysées. And nowadays it's just, it's a very wide thoroughfare studded with monuments, banks, fancy hotels. This is on a double-decker bus, what we're looking at right now, which I also highly recommend, taking the Turibus, which you can do right out of the Centro, and it'll take you right down the Paseo de la Reforma. It's a great way to see it. This is the Mexican Stock Exchange during a parade. This is the Monumento a la Revolución. This is not technically right on the Paseo de la Reforma, but you'll see it if you take a stroll down the Paseo de la Reforma, and you can actually go to the top and get a nice view. This is the Ángel de la Independencia, another very important landmark in Mexico City, more than anything else, because it's where you come when Mexico's national soccer team wins a game. You go here to party and cheer with all of your fellow fans. It's also a place for political protest. It's a gathering spot in the city and a really well-known landmark. This is just a look at some of the beautiful, there's so much public art. One thing that's really cool on the Paseo de la Reforma is that every Sunday they close it to automobile traffic from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. So you can ride bicycles, you can go to a Zumba class, they often have Zumba classes.
And
You
Julie,
can skateboard.
do you see a lot of investment happening in Mexico City for kind of these public spaces, for plazas and pedestrian streets and bike paths?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, this is one of the reasons Mexico City is so wonderful to visit right now, because there's such a feeling of community life here, and there's so much investment and thoughtful investment from the government, from the local government, and making it a more livable city. So this program's actually been going on for a long time, but there's lots of different ways that, they'll have free boxing classes in the Zocalo so people can come out and exercise. And there's these new transit lines, which we'll see in just a minute, that are cable cars, that fly over the city. So there's been a lot of investment in making the city more livable, more fun, having lots of ways to interact. This is a great example of it. And this is kind of fun. This is just to see, if you stroll along the Paseo de la Reforma on a Sunday, you just really never know what you're going to find. Bunch of people roller skating, for example. But yeah, it's just also a great time. You can rent a bicycle, and that's a lot of fun. But you can also just stroll along the Paseo de la Reforma, enjoying the fact that there's no traffic, there's no cars. So you get to really enjoy all those monuments. Now, you mentioned the lake bed earlier, and a lot of the neighborhoods. So once the Centro Histórico, which was on this little island, started getting very crowded and very busy, the rich do as they do, and they started building their palaces outside of the Centro. So they started moving down these neighborhoods that are now sort of on either side of the Paseo de la Reforma. And this is where a lot of the really wonderful art and culture is taking place in Mexico City. So we'll just go through a few of them quickly to give you an idea. This is the Santa Maria la Ribera. This is their Alameda. It's the center of town of another neighborhood that was built in the 19th century by a bunch of people, a bunch of rich people who wanted palaces outside of the Centro, and then they left those palaces. So now it has a very urban vibe. It's really beautiful. This is a great place to come. It's an up-and-coming art scene. There's some great small museums. These are two examples, the Museo del Chopo, which is run by the university that I mentioned, and the Museo de Geología. This one's like a movie set. It's a beautiful 19th century building, and inside all of there's fossils and meteorites, and there's a mammoth skeleton, and it's all creaky and old and full of character. It costs like $1 to go. So definitely stop in if you're walking through the Santa Maria. The Santa Maria also has some old pulquerias. Pulque is something I really recommend you try, because you can only try it really in Mexico. It's slightly alcoholic, slightly fermented sap of the maguey cactus. So this is Pulqueria La Joya. This is an older pulqueria. It's one of the oldest pulquerias in the city. Let me show you a picture. There's some pulque right there. Pulque is generally served, so it's a little bit viscous, a little bit fizzy, and it's usually served in fruit curados is what they're called, with fresh fruit mixed in. It's very refreshing. Makes you feel a little lightheaded in a good way. It doesn't have much alcohol, maybe like a very light beer. But you can only drink it within a day or two of it being harvested. So this comes in, all the pulquerias have it fresh every day. They bring it in fresh every day. And so you can't really get it anywhere outside of Mexico. You have to get it fresh. And just to note, if you go to a pulqueria, it is not a bar. So they won't have beer and they won't have a rum cocktail and they won't have food for you. They serve pulque. So be prepared to drink pulque in a pulqueria. This is the Roma Norte, which is another beautiful neighborhood, also built in the 19th century, a little after the Santa Maria. This is the center of Mexico's dining and nightlife scene. I mean, everybody loves this neighborhood. It's beautiful. It's got murals, it's got sidewalk cafes, wonderful places to eat, parks. It's sort of like an urban dream. It's really lovely. This is actually just right next to it in a neighborhood called La Doctores. It's a new sort of art center and shopping area called Laguna. Just gives you a little taste. There's always just new projects, lots of art, lots of new projects in the Roma. For a lot of people, this is where they like to stay. They look for a hotel in this area. And then one of the things that I also recommend you do, this is in the Doctores as well, but very close to the Roma, is that you visit the Lucha Libre ring and see a Mexican wrestling match. We're just going to watch real quick.
Julie, I'm so curious about Lucha Libre, and people can chime in the Q&A if I'm oversimplifying or stereotyping, but I feel like here in the US, you might not find a huge overlap between people that tune into a thoughtful, information-rich travel presentation on Mexico City and people that would watch kind of the American equivalent of like WWE SmackDown. I'm happy to be corrected in the Q&A if I'm wrong on that. But do you think that this is something that kind of our viewers, thoughtful travelers, would enjoy? And what's kind of the culture there?
Absolutely. I think they would enjoy it. It's really a really wonderful reflection of the culture. It's not, I would say, though it is freestyle wrestling, which is the same as WWE, the style is very different. This is lightweight wrestling, so there's a real emphasis on acrobatic moves. There are these highly choreographed, highly athletic, really beautiful pieces. They're also hilariously funny because, they're very hammy. It's more family friendly. I recommend you go, if you go to see the Lucha Libre, go on Sunday nights at the Arena Mexico. That is family night. So there's tons of children, families there. It doesn't have, there's a little bit of rowdiness, nothing too bad. And it definitely doesn't have, sure, there is like some of the macho feeling, but it's very hammy. So I think viewers will understand that it has a tongue-in-cheek element. And there are women wrestlers. It's much more diverse than what you'd expect. Plus, wrestlers from all over the world participate. So that's also fun. You often see a US wrestler, a Japanese wrestler. But yeah, I would say the tenor of it is pretty different from what you might expect to find at WWE.
And I actually was able to attend a lucha libre in Guadalajara when I was there a year and a half ago. And I was there for an LGBTQ sporting event. And so they had kind of a gay lucha libre night. And it was so fun to see kind of this machismo, but dialed up to kind of a level of camp that was just very fun and accepting. And actually, one of their like local heroes is an out gay wrestler, and he was the grand finale act in a kind of his sparkly pink outfit. And so I was actually very surprised by how fun and enjoyable and welcoming I found it.
I love that story. That's great. Yeah, I think that is reflective of what you're looking at with wrestling in Mexico City too.
Oh, and there he is. Yeah, that's
Oh,
my photo from Guadalajara.
oh, great.
Yeah, it was very, very fun.
It is a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun. Definitely worth checking out. This is another neighborhood right next to the Roma is the Condesa, also full of parks, and it's known for its Art Deco architecture. So that's a lot of fun to walk around the Condesa and see the beautiful parks and Art Deco architecture. So now we're going to do a speed look at the food scene in Mexico City, because I know that's what so many people travel to Mexico City these days to enjoy. No food scene would be complete. Actually, we must begin with tacos, which are the emblematic dish of Mexico City. This is the most emblematic of all, is the taco al pastor, which is a pork taco rubbed with seasoning and some chile. It's cooked on a spit, served in a corn tortilla with some diced onion, fresh pineapple on top, cilantro, and then you put your own salsa on top, depending how spicy you like it. This one's actually vegan. There's lots of vegan versions of the tacos out there, and they are delicious. Vegan food is all the rage in Mexico City too. So don't fear that you won't be able to taste a taco al pastor if you are a vegetarian, because you can, and they're very good. Lots of types of tacos. These are just two other options besides pastor, tacos de guisado, which are sort of, I hear them translated a lot as stew, guisado. That's kind of correct. Let's just say it's like you might find prickly pear cactus, or there might be seasoned ground beef. They have different pots, and you pick out, oh, this is what I want. These are, looks like we have a chile relleno in there, and frijoles or beans and guacamole. And the other said carnitas. Carnitas is another classic taco. It's a pork taco, nose to tail type of deal. You often pick your own type, what part of the pig you want to eat in carnitas. And then nothing, of course, would ever be complete without mentioning the importance of maize to the Mexican diet. People love to eat elotes, which are just, corn on a stick, or corn-based treats. We're very familiar with tortillas, but there's lots of other corn flatbreads that are made in Mexico, sold on the streets in Mexico City. On the right is a tlacoyo, which is a corn flatbread. This one's stuffed with refried beans, and it's got prickly pear cactus on top and cheese. Totally delicious. Tamales are another corn-based food in Mexico. Tamales Madre is actually a restaurant. Tamales are often sold on the street, but you can also go sit down and eat that. A very delicious version at Tamales Madre in the Juarez neighborhood. And on the right is mole negro. And I included this photo because I do want to point out that, Mexico City has its own culinary traditions, but it's also a wonderful place to try food from all over Mexico. You'll find places, food from Oaxaca, from Yucatan, from all the different regions, which is actually very diverse, the food in Mexico. It's fun to get to try different things. And nothing, of course, would be the same without salsa, fresh limes. And at the same time, too, there's a growing international food scene. So, there's tons of standout places, but just to give you a little peek, this is a ramen place, or a Japanese restaurant with ramen, and Canton Mexicali, which is a really fun new place in the Roma, which I mentioned has a great food scene. This is a Mexican, a Mexicali version of Chinese food. Both delicious. So yeah, when you come to Mexico City, There's no need to feel like you have to stick to only Mexican food. There's great pizza. There's great everything. It's just a real food culture. And I think that that's the important thing too, that people are very discriminating diners here. So no matter what you're eating, if it's on the street or in a fine dining white tablecloth restaurant, if it's Asian, if it's pizza, if it's tacos, you know, people are asking for good food here. They know the difference. They and they like to eat well. So it's a real food culture. I don't have time to tell you all about the beer, but if you like beer, there's wonderful craft beer in Mexico. And also a very popular preparation of beer is the michelada, which is on the right, where it's a beer served ice cold with some spicy salsas in it and a salt rim. That's good for daytime drinking. On the left-hand side is a craft beer. Lots of great craft beer. Cocktails too are off the hook in Mexico these days. Big craft cocktail scene. All over the city, but like the Roma, again, the Roma and the Condesa neighborhoods are the places where you're going to really find a lot of amazing places.
Mm, that all looked so delicious.
I know, we're just getting
Well.
started.
So I know we have a couple last neighborhoods that we're going to take a very quick tour of. I just wanted to
Yes.
remind all of our viewers that after those, we will have a Q&A session. So if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the Q&A.
So now we're heading to Chapultepec. So this is the, Chapultepec is the name of the biggest urban park in Mexico City. It's gigantic. It's divided into 4 sections, and it's a very beautiful place to come and you know, do as you do in a park, stroll, picnic. Lots of people come for that, but it's also a cultural center. You know, I guess you could liken it, it's very different in vibe, but you could liken it to Central Park in New York, and that it's also the home of some of the most important cultural institutions in Mexico City. Specifically, the Museo Nacional de Antropología. So I know that I really love anthropology and talking about Mexico's prehistoric, pre-Columbian past, not prehistoric, pre-Columbian past. But this is a place you have to come. It was designed by Pedro Ramirez Vasquez. He's a really famous 20th century architect. It's a beautiful space with this amazing falling fountain in the middle, and all of the rooms around it are dedicated to different pre-Columbian cultures in Mexico. So the Olmecs, the Zapotecs, the Maya, the Mexica, and the people of Tenochtitlan. These are all cultures that are represented in this museum. And it sounds like a lot. It is. I recommend if it's your first time in Mexico City, since you're in Mexico City, I would start in the room that is dedicated to the cultures of the Valley of Mexico, the Valle de Mexico. They're just spectacular, spectacular pieces here, all of which were recovered from the Zocalo or environs, all recovered from the area where you are, right at the moment, at the museum you're standing in. It's, again, a very moving and beautiful experience. The pieces are amazing. This is probably the most famous piece in the museum. They call it the Aztec calendar, though it's not actually a calendar. But it's a big carved monolith, and that's in that same room. The photos don't really do it justice, but definitely I would say start your tour of the museum there. Maybe the next spot to hit is the room dedicated to the cultures of Teotihuacan, which is an archaeological site just outside of Mexico City. It makes a great day trip. And if you're going to go to Teotihuacan, definitely come to this room, because you'll get to see all of these beautiful artifacts that were also recovered there. I love those too. That's almost enough to fill your day. But if you still have energy, there's plenty of other amazing rooms to see, cultures. This is an Olmec. This is these giant stone heads from the Olmec culture, from Veracruz, Tabasco, from the Gulf Coast of Mexico. It's one of the oldest cultures in Mexico. There's a beautiful collection of work of Olmec work. So, you know, this is a museum you have to set aside some time for, maybe multiple visits. And
And I
this is
know,
the
Julie, I know that my friends that have traveled to Mexico City recently. I've had several, and all of them say that this museum is an absolute must. Is this a museum that gets a large influx of visitors, and should people make reservations, or is there anything else that they should do to try to avoid the crowds?
Yeah, well, it does get a lot of visitors. Fortunately, it's very big, so they tend to disperse once they're inside. But I think in general, there really isn't a way to reserve. You can come anytime. I'd say get there early in the morning, close to opening time is the best bet to have the museum a little more to yourself. And unfortunately, I would say avoid it on Sundays. On Sundays, almost every museum in Mexico is free to Mexican nationals and residents. So it's a great way to spend some time with the kids, and everybody heads out to the museums, which is really amazing. In Mexico, there's definitely the idea that museums are cultural spaces for everyone. They're very affordable in general, and on Sundays they're free. So that is when they're jam-packed. So I'd say go any day other than the Sunday to get the museum to yourself. And also you can remember that museums in Mexico are generally closed on Monday. So yeah, maybe get yourself there on a Wednesday morning to get a little more peace and quiet. And if you go back for a second visit, this is a view. I unfortunately don't have one of the exhibits, but there's a whole second floor of ethnography exhibits that explore the current cultures of Mexico, the contemporary cultures of Mexico, indigenous cultures. So they talk about food, dress, traditional dwellings. It's really fascinating. And it's a part of the museum that many people don't make it to. So, if you're on your second trip to Mexico City, set aside some time and go upstairs and learn about the people and culture of Mexico today. And this is right outside the museum. This is a beautiful show. I won't tell you too much about it, so you can be surprised when you see it, but this is from the state of Veracruz as well. It's a sort of ceremonial a ceremony that they perform right outside the museum every day. You'll hear the little flute playing. And then again, there's a lot of really important cultural institutions. This is in the park as well. This is a contemporary art museum, the Museo Rufino Tamayo. Many of you may have heard of Tamayo. It's not actually his work. He founded the museum, but you won't see his work here. It's a contemporary art museum. It's an interior view. The Museum of Modern Art is also in Chapultepec Park. It's right across the street from the Tamayo. This was designed by the same architect who designed the Anthropology Museum. As you can see, it's also architecturally stunning. Two more excellent museums. These are actually a little bit north of the park, but I just wanted to point them out. The Museo Jumex and the Museo Sumaya. Jumex is a wonderful top-tier contemporary art museum run by the foundation, the Jumex Foundation. And the Sumaya is, it's more classical artwork from Europe, but that architecture, the design of that museum is worth seeing. They're right across the street from each other. They're both free to enter, so they're busy all the time. Definitely worth visiting. And then again, the park itself. The park itself is its own beautiful work of art. It has really lovely landscape architecture. It's a great place to ride bikes. On the weekends, I don't know that you could ride a bike this freely. There's so many people here. Strolling with their families, picnicking, buying candies. It's a real popular feeling, really lovely place to visit, and a big green space in the city. This is just one example of the landscape architecture in the park. This is a statue of Nezahualcóyotl, who was a king, a Nahuatl-speaking king of Texcoco. They were also allies of Tenochtitlan. And here he's immortalized in the park. Another cultural center. This used to be like the White House, the presidential palace, and the last administration turned it into an art and cultural center. The Centro Cultural Dos Pinos. It's no longer a private mansion for the president, but a public art. So this is sort of the public projects that I was talking about earlier. There's just been so many of them in recent years. And this is one of them. It's a really popular place to go on the weekends. There's often music, special events. the gastronomy festivals, all sorts of things happen here. And as you can see, lots of people come out. And here we are. I just had to share because this is brand new in the city, maybe 6 months. The cable cars, they've been installing these cable cars across the city as transport. But this is a newer line that runs along the side of Chapultepec Park. Beautiful views. The cost is 7 pesos, less than 50 cents to ride this. For me, I rode it just as a tourist, but people are using this to get to work. Just giving a little sense of park. This is a beautiful fountain that was designed by Diego Rivera in the second section of the park. And this was a mural that he painted inside what was once a cistern. They were building a new. So this is a really interesting example of how throughout its history, Mexico City has sort of combined art and public works in a way that's meant to make the city a livable and wonderful place for its residents. This was when they were diverting some underground rivers into a new water system. The government actually hired Diego Rivera to paint murals on the inside of this cistern where before the water was redistributed downhill. Eventually, they did develop a new system with new civil engineers, but and the murals, they dried it up so that they can be preserved. It's just a lovely place to visit in the park. This is also a museum in the park. Actually, it's a gallery. It's free to visit. You do need reservations. It's called Lago Algo. And then again, this was just to give a slice of life feeling. You can see how interested in general people are very interested in coming out and experiencing their city. There's often crowds, never overwhelming, I wouldn't say, maybe every once in a while. But it's just really nice to feel the vibrancy, the interest in visiting places throughout the city. Okay, so we're in our last little leg of our journey through Mexico City. It's taken us a while to get here. But now we are arriving in the south, a neighborhood called Coyoacan that was once a small town that eventually got swallowed up by the sprawl. So, as the city expanded from the Centro Histórico, it started eating up the little villages that surrounded it. And Coyoacan still feels like a little village right in the city. Beyond it, you can see some skyscrapers and you never quite lose the feeling you're in Mexico City, but there's this charming small town feel. And some of the oldest structures. This is one of the oldest churches in Mexico City, and it's in Coyoacan as well. This is a lovely place to spend the day and stroll, have lunch. But there's one reason why everybody goes, which is the Museo Frida Kahlo. This was Frida Kahlo, the Mexican painter. This was her childhood home. Years later, when she was married to Diego Rivera, they actually lived here as adults as well. It's really a symbol of her and her life. And she's an incredibly popular painter, of course, worldwide. And many people make the pilgrimage to see her home. And even though you're looking at these crowds, I want to give a plug for this museum. It is very moving to visit. There's, her clothing. You can see her bed that she slept in. If you're at all a Frida Kahlo fan, even in the most remote sense, I think you'll find it's very moving to see it. Plus, it's a lovely home. But you do need to make reservations, which you can do online. You do need to make reservations in order to secure your spot as far in advance as possible. They sell out frequently, as you can see from the crowds. And there's even a good cantina in Coyoacan if you're there. So we're going to make one last stop. This is in the very, very south of Mexico City. So now we've even moved beyond public transport lines to the neighborhood of Xochimilco. And if you'll indulge me for a moment, I want to tell you a little bit about the history and then we'll take a quick tour. But Xochimilco was the place where they originally started the hydroponic farming, the chinampas, as they're called, which are these artificial hydroponic farms that were built on top of the lake bed. So way back in the pre-Columbian era, the Xochimilcas, the people who lived here, were the ones who developed this unique form of farming. And the Mexica learned it from them and adapted it to Tenochtitlan. So these canals in Xochimilco actually date back to the pre-Columbian era, many of them. This is an age-old system of farming, age-old system of canals. They have been here for hundreds and hundreds of years. And now they're a great place to go and like have a family gathering or a party. I'll give you a little sense here of the vibe. So that's in the main canals. There's also quieter canals.
Ese güey no es colombiano. Pero esta es una versión, cuando menos es una versión que le pedimos a los mariachis que él la compuso. La y fresa, ojalá que llueva café.
So those are, so there are quieter canals that still have where people are still farming, and you can actually ask your boat rider, the boat driver. They have these big sticks they push you along, and when you set out, you can say, "I'd like to go on a tour ecológico," like the ecological tour, and they'll take you out to these chinampas that are much quieter, where people still live. They row canoes across them, just like they did in the old days. Yeah, some of them sell food to tourists from their canoes. That's a really fun thing. As you're floating along with your family, you can get your beers and so on, and your quesadillas, and eat them in your boat. So it's a place to go with a group of people. It is definitely a little further afield. So this is, if you have a little extra time in Mexico City, but it is just the historic value here is tremendous, and it's a whole lot of fun. So that's why I always do recommend Xochimilco. Yeah, and then just as a final note, the university, which is also in the South, is a place of tremendous culture. This is the Contemporary Art Museum, and there's a concert hall, there's movie theaters. It's a place, this is, again, I think getting a little deeper on Mexico City here. If you have a couple extra days, it's worth checking it out. Again, amazing architecture, culture. It's a place definitely worth visiting.
Well, thank you so much, Julie, for that tour. I mean, I still very much want to go, but I feel like I just experienced half of Mexico City, at least just in this past hour. So thank you so much for your expertise and the thought that you put into that. We are going to have a time for Q&A. We have some great questions from our audience. Before we get to that, we have a quick word from our sponsor. And our sponsor this week is the Travel with Rick Steves radio show. So while our TV show and our guidebooks our TV show, we have a few specials in other places, but most of our materials are about Europe on Monday Night Travel and on the Travel with Rick Steves radio show. We love adventuring to other parts of the world. And our radio show just turned 20 years old. And so to celebrate, Rick filmed a very short little video that I would like to share with all of you. So if you've been one of our radio show viewers, this video is from Rick to you.
Hey, I'm Rick Steves. And this spring, the Travel with Rick Steves radio show is celebrating its 20th anniversary. Since 2005, we've produced over 750 hours for public radio. And as a radio host, I get to be the curious student, taking you along for what I hope is a fascinating ride. Each week, right here on Travel with Rick Steves, I introduce you to guests who bring the far corners of our world into focus as we explore places and topics, taking us from New York City to the back roads of Mexico to Zanzibar, the Arctic, the Himalayas, and of course, my favorite places in Europe. Over the past 2 decades, we've been joined by some excellent guests, from fellow travel writers like Bill Bryson and Pico Iyer to activists like Art Simon and Gloria Steinem, not to mention my fellow tour guides and guidebook researchers. Most of all, we're thrilled to have been joined by you. From me and my travel team, Tim, Kaz, and Donna, thank you for 20 great years of traveling across the airwaves with us. And if you haven't tuned in yet, Travel with Rick Steves airs weekly on more than 500 public radio stations all around the United States and Canada, and it can be found wherever you find your podcasts. We look forward to lots more travels with you in the near future. Thank you so much, and happy travels.
All right. So a big thank you to all of you who have been part of our radio show. And Julie, you've been part of our radio show. You did an interview with Rick. I linked to you. We actually have 3 interviews with you. I linked to one of them in the chat. And how was your experience on our radio show?
Oh, it was wonderful. I have to tell you, I was so nervous because I'm a writer. I'm not used to that kind of, I'm not used to talking and answering questions in that way. And Rick just made me feel so comfortable. And he's such a wonderful person to converse with, so curious. And it was such a great experience for me. I actually have never listened to them. That's a little more than I can do. But I know some people I had heard them on the radio, and it was really cool for me to hear that too.
You say that speaking and answering questions are not your forte, but you just spoke wonderfully. Now we're going to see if you can answer some questions wonderfully, because we have plenty of questions from our viewers. As often happens, many of the first questions that we get after our shows is, I want to go. What time of year should I go? And while I know that there's kind of an inexhaustible amount of things to see in Mexico City, for an average traveler, how long would you recommend staying in the city?
Good questions. So first of all, when to go? Anytime. There are really kind of 2 major seasons to keep in mind, which is the dry and the wet season. So the winter is the dry season. So it's a little chillier, very sunny, not any rain. That can be a really nice time to visit. I love Mexico City in the winter. The rains start up in June and they run until maybe October, November. So you get a little more heat in those months, but they're mitigated by these lovely, powerful afternoon thunderstorms. So, as long as you don't mind having a little siesta or a coffee in the afternoon and wait out the rain, the summer's a lovely time to visit as well. I'd say maybe only the month of May can get really hot. So if you're averse to the heat, that might be the time to avoid. But again, the climate's very dry. It's at altitude, so it's not a place where it gets excessively hot either. And then in terms of time, I would say my minimum generally, I'd say, is 5 days. I think you need a day in the Centro, you need a day at the Anthropology Museum, a day to see some artwork, a day in Coyoacan, and then maybe just a day to relax, walk around the neighborhoods. That would be, I'd say, bare minimum. You could easily do a week, though.
And speaking of going around town, a few people asked, what are your recommendations for transportation around the city? Is there good public transportation? Should people plan to try to find Ubers? Should they take one of those cable cars?
Oh, they should definitely take the cable car. I don't know if cable car is the right word now that I'm saying a gondola. I'm not sure what they're called. Yeah, maybe they're gondolas. It's called the cable bus. So yeah. Yeah, no, so public transportation in Mexico City is very extensive. It's so crowded in a lot of cases that you don't want to ride it during the morning rush hour or the afternoon rush hour at all. But one really nice option for public transportation that I absolutely recommend is the Metrobus, which is the above ground bus that runs. They have its own dedicated line, so you're never dealing with traffic. It runs along the city streets. It's a good one to get you from the Roma to the Centro Histórico, for example. You can do that on the Metrobus. It costs 7 pesos, which is less than 50 cents. You kind of get a view of the city as you go. It's very clean. There's a police officer in each station. Lots of them have bathrooms too. And there's sort of an all-purpose public transportation card now. So that exact same card, if you're feeling a little more ambitious, there are lots of bike lanes in Mexico City, and bicycling has become a much more popular way to get around. It's very flat, so you don't need a lot of physical strength to do it, but maybe a little bit of bravery with the traffic. But they are really nice, very safe bike lanes, and there's a city bike share. And so that exact same card you can use to be part of the bike share program, though probably easiest is to get the app. There's an app, so you can sign up for the bike share if you want to cycle around the city, which could be fun. Other than that, distances are big. I love to walk. I walk anywhere that I can walk. If I can do it in under an hour, I will. Otherwise, Uber and Didi are both really easy and available all over the city. Always safe, generally good experiences for me with those apps. So I get around a lot in Uber myself, and I recommend that definitely for visitors too.
And while it's not hilly in Mexico City, we have to remember that it's at altitude. So maybe don't bike the first day or two. Get adjusted to walking first.
That's a good tip, Gabe.
Grant is wondering, with the vast amount of sites to see, are there any sites that you recommend that people avoid, either because they're just kind of gimmicky and don't offer a lot of cultural value, or just because there are a lot of options and there are some popular ones that you feel like just don't live up to the hype?
That's a toughie. Well, I think we could start by saying an area that used to be really famous with tourists called the Zona Rosa is no longer a place that's really worth visiting. It's got a lot of McDonald's and chain restaurants. It's just not, the charm is gone. So if you've ever heard anybody tell you from back in the day that the Zona Rosa is a cool place to visit, I think that's a skippable one. In terms of other ones, I think it really comes down, I wouldn't say there's anything I'd call necessarily overrated, but there's such a diversity of things to do and see, such a diversity of museums, of cultural sites, anthropological sites, archaeological sites, that I think, taking some time to plan and picking what's right for you is a good call. Not everything that shows up on TikTok or on Instagram is necessarily going to be your favorite thing. And definitely there's the one thing I will say is there's a lot of trend pieces right now about Mexico City, and they tend to focus on the same places over and over again. So I would tell anyone who's going to visit the city to dig a little deeper and find the places that really sound interesting to you. There's no reason to go to the same restaurants that everybody goes to. Unless it's Bar La Opera or something like that, of course, I totally recommend. But, generally, there's such diversity. So yeah, do your homework and find out what you're going to enjoy, and don't worry about the trend pieces.
We have time for a couple more questions, Julie. We had a few people that were wondering about, are there any health and safety things to keep in mind? I know Latin America, like the US, like Europe, there's a diversity of levels of safety. I know we talk about in Barcelona, you really have to look out for pickpockets. Are there any, some people ask, I know that in some places in Central America, you need to think about the water quality. So any general health and safety recommendations?
Yeah, well, off the top of my head, there are a couple, and thanks for that question. In Mexico in general, safety is something that you need to keep in mind. Mexico City is a generally fairly safe place to be a tourist. If you keep the regular precautions in mind for any big city, right? Travel around during daylight hours, at night, stay closer to your hotel or take a Uber to and from. Don't walk down dark alleys, that sort of thing. Just using a lot of common sense in terms of navigating a city that you're not familiar with. There can be some, petty theft, things like that tourists will experience. I think in general, most people have a safe experience. Watch your wallet on the metro, watch your wallet in a busy market. For sure, there can be some crime. But I would say Mexico City overall, most people with simple precautions have a pretty seamless and safe experience. In terms of health, the water is, I know there's a lot, the question I get a lot from people is, when they're served a glass of water in a restaurant, like, is this water safe to drink? Yes, it is. Mexicans drink filtered water as well. So you definitely don't drink it right out of the tap, but nobody does. So it's not really an option. No one's going to serve you a glass of water that's straight from the tap because everyone drinks filtered water themselves. Ice is filtered, so you can feel safe in a restaurant. In fact, interestingly, in an effort to rid the city of plastic water bottles and all the waste that they create, it is now a law in Mexico City that if you ask for a glass of water in a restaurant, you must be served a glass of filtered water in the restaurant. So feel free to ask for one, and you will see that they're very happy to oblige by the new law and bring you a glass of water. So yeah, feel safe with that. Don't drink out of the tap in your hotel. Buy yourself a bottle of water or use a filter. But that's common practice for everyone in Mexico, so not something to worry about as much. With food, it depends on your sensitive stomach. If you're going to want to risk a food's, honestly, I don't even want to say risk a street food because I think you can get sick anywhere if you're sensitive to something. It's not really, I would say in general, it's not even always related to hygiene, but the Mexican diet is very rich in chile. It's new things. Some people do get a little turista. They call it diarrhea when you come, traveler's diarrhea. You might get a little turista. I think you can leave that to your own, your own body and what you can tolerate. I think those are the safety questions and health and safety questions I tend to get the most is about, food and water. But I do want to point out one more, which is that Mexico City is prone to earthquakes, and they happen frequently. And there's a really interesting system in Mexico City called the seismic alarm. It is actually a public alarm. It's installed all over the streets. And when an earthquake happens, Mexico City is not on a fault, but so the faults are way out on the coast. So by the time an earthquake reaches Mexico City, it can take anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes to actually get there. So when an earthquake hits one of the faults that can affect Mexico City, it will set off the seismic alarm. Now, this can be very alarming, as it's meant to be. It's very scary. It's a very loud alarm. What you should do is just evacuate wherever you are, come out onto the street. You'll see everybody else doing it. It tends to be very orderly. There may or may not be an earthquake. It sets off, I think, at a very low bar, like a 5.1 and up, or even lower maybe. So it's frequent that the alarm will go off. Everyone freaks out, runs out into the street, nothing happens. But you may experience an earthquake too. But yeah, that's a sort of interesting feature on the safety, but definitely the thing to do if you hear the earthquake alarm is to evacuate. I'd check with your hotel though, if you have any questions about that, because they'll also have a plan for earthquakes because they are frequent.
Thank you very much, Julie. And we have time for one last question. For many travelers, I'm guessing, Mexico City might be the first place that they come to in Mexico. It's certainly an obvious place to start, but for travelers that have maybe been to Mexico City and want to go back for Mexico round 2, or they want to build Mexico City into a larger trip of Mexico, what would be a couple of the next destinations that you would most recommend to them in Mexico?
That's a good question. Well, I also read a guidebook to San Miguel de Allende in Guanajuato, and so that's another area that's very close to my heart. It's a really beautiful colonial era cities, way more laid back than the city. That's a place to go to relax and enjoy art and architecture and food and chilling out. It's a really nice area, very Mexican in feel. It's up on the high plateaus. You can go horseback riding. So that's definitely high on my list. I think everyone would say Oaxaca is a wonderful place to visit, both the city and all the little small towns around the city. It's a place of tremendous culture. It's also physically beautiful. There's a lot of pre-Columbian culture there as well. There's archaeological sites, spectacular food. And even near Mexico City, there's a couple places worth checking out, like the city of Puebla, which is also a colonial era city. Tepoztlan, a little town in the mountains. It's almost endless here. Honestly, there are so many wonderful places to visit. It's hard to narrow it down. And then the beaches. What can I say? I also love the beaches. So,
Well, Julie, thank you so much for taking time to share this incredible adventure through Mexico City with us. It is so clear. I love talking with guidebook writers, especially because you can just feel the information flowing forth from them. All those hours of research just naturally springing from you like a fountain of information. So thank you so much
yeah.
for being our fountain this evening.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Thanks to everyone who stayed through this very long discussion. It was so much fun for me to get to share, and I hope you're going to come down to Mexico City.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank
Adios. Hasta
you.
luego.
Adios.
Thank you to all of you for joining us again. If you want to join us for one more virtual event before our spring break, this Thursday, we are going to be back with our next Tours 101 information session to tell you about our tour program and if it might be the right fit for you. Otherwise, Monday Night Travel will return on June 2nd with a show on Central Turkey. I look forward to seeing you then, and in the meantime, I wish you a wonderful Cinco de Mayo.